Hello, my name is Gabby Richardson, and you are listening to The Nexus of Narratives, where we use stories to bring people together across belief systems. New episodes are released every Monday on your favorite podcast platform, where I have a conversation with a guest about an obstacle that they faced in their life that invited them to take a look at their beliefs, whether about themselves or about the world around them. We talk about how those beliefs were formed and how formative moments shape how we interact with the world. The Nexus of Narratives is what we will uncover through this story exploration. It's the common thread that unites all of us, no matter what our beliefs are. If you are an avid podcast listener, you know the deal. Please take a moment on the platform where you are listening to rate, follow, and review. Those little acts go a long way in ensuring that this important work reaches more people. Instead of doom scrolling on social media, follow the Nexus of Narratives to add some connection to your social feed. Check the show notes for links to follow the Nexus of Narratives on social media, access bonus content on Patreon, connect with me, connect with today's guest, and see any content warnings. All right, enjoy this story. Hello and welcome to Nexus of Narratives. Chris, thank you so much for sharing time with me here.
Thanks for having me on the show, Gabby.
Yeah, this is awesome. I mean, we only met, goodness, what was it? Within the last week, we connected on Facebook, which I always think those connections are the most fun, only because to me, it speaks to how the purpose of the Nexus of Narratives really connects with other people, even through not personally talking to me first. So I'm extremely grateful that this meant something to you to where you'd want to join and share a story.
Yeah, I've been in podcast groups on Facebook a lot lately, and I absolutely have been amazed at the number of people like yourself that I've met, people with great stories, great backgrounds, and just out there sharing stories that we can all collaborate on and all learn from. So I'm grateful as well to have met you through that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, and if you were to just briefly introduce yourself, I'd love for you to take a moment to share who you are.
Definitely. So my name is Chris, and I'm an acceptance coach. And what I do is I help people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. And a little bit about my backstory. In the last 5 years in particular, I've had to watch my grandfather pass away in front of me. I've lost a child that's stillborn. I have also gone through a lot of job loss. I've gone through financial hardship. I've transplanted from one side of the country, one side of the U.S. to the other. And all this loss that happened, all this grief and this trauma that happened, I was really faced with the choice of letting this be a creative session in my life or let it be something that's destructive. And I chose to create with it and create some meaning and purpose behind my loss. And so, something that I've learned is that grief is really a transformational journey of self, because when we go through a loss, our life gets upended, and what we are used to, what we're comfortable with, is no longer there. It's been destroyed. And so there is this new person, this new version of self. And so how do we figure that out? And how do we navigate that, by the way? And that's something that's not spoken very well of in the country. It's not talked about a lot. And grief is always seen in this negative light. And so I've chosen to take this negative topic that everybody sees as a kind of a Debbie Downer conversation and turn into something powerful, for people to rediscover who they are, reclaim their purpose in life, through transformational healing.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I really do believe in our culture, in the American culture, grief and loss are something almost, whether it's like taboo or it's kind of seen as something dark, it's hard, it's heavy. And there are so many other cultures that celebrate it and have different views on it. So I think it really speaks to the power that we as individuals place on something, which is what I hear from you in your experience.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing I caught on to with both cases where I went through loss. I heard people say all the time, loss and grief is just a part of life. You just have to accept it and move on, and you have to let it go to a degree and go continue to live your life. And unfortunately, we're humans. I don't care if you're a man or woman, what age you are, it doesn't matter. We all have emotions, we all have feelings, and that doesn't translate to taking experiences like that and just saying, oh, it just happened, I'll move on with life. We don't work that way, unfortunately. There's a lot of people I coach and work with that have wired into that mentality, and they do reach a point in life where things just stop working. And it's because when you bury down those emotions and you don't listen to them, or you don't give yourself permission or space to feel those things, they start creeping out in ugly ways in your life. And that can be anger. That can be, taking something out on somebody else in a different way. That can be, letting your job go. You can end up letting all these things go in your life out of control when you don't take time to give yourself permission to just feel that and be there. And that's why I say grief it's a transformational journey, but also it's an opportunity. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And so, one of the hardest lessons I learned, by the way, on my grief journey that was really hard for me to hear, and I will share it with you guys. And I know it's a little triggering to hear this because I was right there when I heard it. When we lose someone in our life, that's their experience. The pain and suffering we feel from that loss is our own doing, because we're trying to take on that situation experience someone else had. And so that was really hard for me to hear, by the way, when I went through loss. But what I'll share is that when I really thought about that, I said, yeah, that is my grandfather's experience. That's my son's experience. I'm upset and hurt that I lost them, and we all are, and we all have the right to be. But that's their experience. So when we look at it from that perspective and we say, at least we were there for them, at least we got to experience that and see what that was for them. And then, like I said, grief takes you down that road of transformation, and that's where you end up in this place of shedding the layers of your old self, maybe things that don't work anymore, or maybe parts of you that aren't relevant anymore to things, and you shed that, and then you start learning and transforming into this new person. And it's really a process. If you give yourself permission, it's a beautiful process, and those situations can become a gift instead of a curse.
That's really incredible. And I love how you framed that as it's their experience. And I think someone who is in it would be understandably maybe really angry, or you don't understand, or something like that. I think there's a lot of feelings because it's intense. But it's an opportunity for us to own our own feelings. Right. And that's what I heard in that. And so I think this is a beautiful opportunity and I think we will naturally come back to this. I am so sure of it. But I would love to hear specifically about some of your experiences you shared, just very high level immediately in the introduction. And so I would love to dive deeper into those experiences of yours that were really pivotal for your beliefs around grief and loss.
Yeah. I'll share both my losses. I don't go into depth about some of them, so I still get triggered like most people. But what I'll share, my grandfather fought a terminal battle with cancer for 3 years. We had a joke in the hospital the day we found out he had it, because my grandfather hit the jackpot with it. 4% of people in the country get this rare blood cancer, leukemia, and unfortunately, it's not very well studied. There really isn't a cure for it, because the cancer is so strong that you can get chemotherapy and it'll just rear its ugly head. It just will come back. It'll never go away. And so, that it was hard to hear, kind of thing. My grandpa liked to take things light. That's just kind of who he was in life. And, I was there for him through most of that, but he told me at a certain point, family's always here for you, but you can't put your life on hold for me. And that was kind of hard for me to process. And so I ended up moving across the country the year before he passed. And, again, that was a really hard place for me, because I wanted to be there for him, but he just continued to force on me. He can't hold your life back because of me. And so I had that whole thing happen a year before this happened. And long story short, I flew home because I heard he wasn't doing well. So I flew home, and 2 days later, he had, which looked like a seizure episode with somebody. And I rushed in the room and grabbed him, trying to take care of him. And he just passed right in my arms. And it was the first time I have first time I have felt that kind of experience. And I will share for everybody that I don't wish that upon anybody, but it's unfortunately a part of life. And I'll just say it is a very pivotal moment in your life. And I will say that I equate it to driving down the freeway and just slamming on your brakes at 80 miles an hour. It'll hit you that hard and that fast. And so when you're in that situation, by the way, you have a lot of feelings going through you. You've got a lot of anger, you've got a lot of pain, you've got a lot of, sadness, hurt, that all these emotions just start stirring in your head like a mixing bowl. And it's hard to describe how you feel in that moment. There's just so much going on. I didn't eat for 3 days after that happened. I was a very depressed person for 3 months after that happened. But what I came to, which is why I shared that story about that it was his experience, is that when I wrapped my head around that, I put myself in a place where I could celebrate him every day. And so I went from this place of like, I'm really hurt, I'm really suffering, and I still get upset, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I'm not Mr. Happy moved on from this. I am far from that. But I'll just say that I turned this suffering that I had, that it really was my own doing, I turned that into celebrating his life every day. So when I work on wood projects, when I'm out driving around, or if I'm out doing something and I am in a place that I remember him, for example, I have a sailboat, and every time I go sailing, I think of my grandpa, because he sailed for 15 years on boats. And so I turned that loss into something that I celebrate every day. And that's what helps me move through grief. And what I share with people too, by the way, there's not a let go of it and move on thing. I can't stand that in the grief community. It's really bad advice people get. And so what I want to share is that there's moving forward with things. There's not moving on, there's moving forward. You're not going to get over it. You're not going to be able to let it go. I hate to tell you that. It's just those things don't happen with us because, again, we're emotional beings. So I choose to celebrate him. That's my way of moving forward. And it's the way I carry him with me in my life. And he's still here, just different form. And that's where, like I say in my coaching, discovering acceptance. That's a big part of your grief journey. When you can accept that you're not going to get him back the way you had him. It's not going to change no matter what you do. But if you celebrate that and accept it, that can become a beautiful gift that you give on to other people. And Gabby, I don't know about you. I'm sure you've lost people in your life, but you probably have stories of those people that there's moments that come along and you share those moments, about somebody that you lost.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. So one that stands out to me is my most recent loss was my grandmother, who was like another mother to me. And it's interesting, the synchronicities of a few people who have passed in my life. And my grandmother was one of them, where and I think I shared this with you when we were doing our logistics chat, that she actually passed on the same day that Betty White died. Yeah. And that was also the same. There were a couple of days that we had a really tragic fire here in the area of Colorado where I live. And so a lot of people share the grief around the fire. And I'm like, I don't even really remember experiencing like the aftermath of the fire. I lived in the next town over and I was experiencing grieving my grandmother. But and we had a huge snowstorm, we had a big blizzard that was coming. And I had booked a flight to go back to Las Vegas to be with my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother was at my mom's house at the time, and she was on hospice care there. The hospice nurse, I was there, and they had said, oh, she probably has about a month left. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go home for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, get my work in order, make sure that I can work remotely from Las Vegas so I can be here with her when she goes. And so I was just getting everything in order that I could here. And I had my flight booked, and I was explaining to my mom, like, I don't know that I'll be able to make this flight with this blizzard. It actually looks like it's going to be pretty bad. So my husband and I were going through a hard time in our relationship, and we were going to spend that evening together. And I said, I kind of feel like it'll be my best bet for us to work on us for an extra day or two. And then I'll come back after the blizzard passes, because I would rather spend the time either with you or with him rather than waiting in the airport as my flight potentially gets canceled. And I had joked with my mom. I said, and also, knowing grandma, if she knows that I chose to come here to watch her die instead of work on my relationship, she will probably haunt me for the rest of her days. Like, let's be honest. And my mom started laughing and she was like, yeah, you better rebook that flight because you're absolutely right. If she could, she will give you all of the wrath that she possibly could. Like, how dare you? And we get off the phone. And so then I go and I'm at the gym. Like, I had just finished working out and I go onto my phone to rebook my flight. My mom calls me. I'm not even kidding. 2 minutes later. And she said, she just died. She's gone.
Whoa.
I walked in the room. She's gone. Yeah. And we thought she had at least a few weeks left. And to me, I was like, oh, there was some kind of, I don't know what energy it was. I don't know how to make sense of it. And I think it's just one of those things that will never make sense. That it was like, once I had fully accepted, no, she doesn't want me to be there when she dies. And I'm okay with that. That she was like, okay, that was all I needed.
I'm really glad you brought that up and to share that story because what you just hit on about acceptance with that's one of the things we struggle with in grief. And I'm glad you said, maybe that grandma didn't want you there for that reason, for whatever reason. And a lot of people that go through grief, we don't know why this happens or how it happens. We get frustrated by it. There's always this like unknown, unsettled thing. But you just described a perfect example of walking through that acceptance process. And even though you don't know why it happened that way, and you never will know, but just accepting that that's what happened, that's a big step in the healing journey.
It is. And I found out of all of the death and loss that I've gone through, hers has been the easiest emotionally for me. And of course, there are still moments that come up where I'll feel emotional, I'll feel hurt, I'll feel the grief creep back up when I find moments where I'm missing her. But like, that's okay. And I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember when she and I used to do this. And my mom would reminisce as we started playing a card game again that my great-grandmother and my grandmother taught me. And we'll joke, oh man, if she was playing cards with us, she would have said this and she would have said that and she would have screamed this. And we get to laugh about it, even though we're still like missing her in that moment. And I think it's a really beautiful way that I have gone through the journey with her as opposed to previous family members that I had lost. Like I'd lost my uncle to suicide when I was a teenager, my grandfather to the side effects of Parkinson's, and my great-grandmother all within less than a year. And so those were all extremely challenging because I was 15 at the time that all of those happened during a very pivotal moment of my life, just figuring out who the heck I am and what life is. Yeah. And so the journey through those for me was extremely different. And it took a lot longer for me to come to the acceptance, come to the part of finding joy in remembering them rather than experiencing pain, remembering them as opposed to my grandmother. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think, that's the hard part. I'm glad you brought up what that difference was like when you were a teenager versus losing grandma recently. Like those are very different experiences and different places of life, honestly. When we're kids, we have this, imagination that we can fix anything and do anything. And then we find out very cold realities. There's things in life that just can't be fixed. And that's what, death taught me, and especially losing my son, I can share that story a little bit. I've learned that death is the only permanent thing in this world. It really is. I mean, that's the one thing you can't change. You can't take back. You can't make it better. You can't fix it. You can't do anything. It's permanent. That's it. And so, that too, with my losses, I learned going through things is that things that you find out when you're on the grief journey, you find out that about 95% of what you think are problems every day are not problems. It's like somebody turned the volume down in your head. And so you really start finding out what's important to you, what matters to you, what's important. You really just end up in those places and you let go of a lot of things that just don't matter. You thought they mattered, but they really didn't. And so it gives you this really very unique perspective on life when you go through that situation. And, I'm really glad I appreciate you sharing that about, losing 3 family members in 1 year at 15 years old. That is very, very hard. I can't imagine how hard that would have been.
It was rough. I think it's interesting that a lot of my patterns and behaviors actually tie back to how I showed up in that as I'm going to, like what happened with me was, I'm going to diminish my feelings and my experience and support everybody else because I lost my uncle and my grandfather, not my brother and my dad. So I'm going to step in because there's no way that my pain is greater than yours. And that is something that I've seen as a pattern through my entire life that I have in the last few years been like, oh, that's where that started. So we get to work on the beliefs that I had developed about myself and diminishing my own needs in order to support others and start to work on those is actually where it started to show up, was at that time. So it's really fascinating. I mean, humans are fascinating to me.
We're fascinating people. And that's why I always say, grief doesn't have it's not a linear path. I try to tell that to a lot of people I coach. It's not linear. I went to the ocean. I live in Washington, and I went out to the ocean recently about 2-3 weeks ago. And there's a big jetty out there. It's just this big, long thing of rocks, like big pile of rocks to break up waves from the ocean. And I love to go stand on the other side of the jetty where most people are scared so I can watch the waves up close. And a lot of people are very intimidated by that. And I get it because the ocean's a big, powerful thing. And yes, you can get swept off the jetty pretty easy. But me, it was my first time back on the Pacific coast, and I love the water. And so I stood there pretty close to these big rollers, 15 footers coming across the jetty. And it reminded me of grief. It really reminded me that as you're going through the grief process, you have moments of very calm seas. You feel fine. You feel normal. You feel like you can just carry on day to day like nothing happened. And then there's days that you have massive big waves of grief hit you. And there's times that it's very hard to control that. And I try to refrain from saying the word control with it because you really can't. It just hits you. And so I use the example of don't fight it, feel it, let it happen because you can't stop it. And so, when I lost my grandfather, for example, my mom and my grandmother walked on like life, like nothing ever happened the day after it happened. It just was, let's just go back to normal life and just bury all our emotions and feelings. And I can assure that people that do that, by the way, it will come back to get you. Whether that's a year or two, 5 years, 10 years, it'll come back. It'll be very big because you didn't allow yourself permission to feel and permission to experience that. And so your body and your mind store that somewhere, and it just sits there waiting to be released. And that's why I always say, people that go through grief, anger is normal. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's telling you what you're missing, what you're feeling, what you need to hear. And so, I share that grief just has a lot of a roller coaster of waves. And I felt that a little bit when I lost my grandfather. It was worse when I lost my kid. It was just brutal. My son's heart stopped the day before he was supposed to be born. And so I remember, when I went through that grief and that shock, by the way, I felt like I was dead inside. Like my whole body was just empty inside. There was nothing there. That's really what that felt like. And then when I got to meet him after he was born, my wife said this to me. I didn't realize it in the moment, when we were at the hospital, but she said, "You never cried around him. You just were smiling and happy, and you just had nothing but love over your face." And I said, that kind of loss was very different from losing my grandfather because I had 30 something years with grandpa. I have so many memories to look back on. I have so many times to laugh about, like you said about your grandma with games. My grandfather used to cheat Mexican Train. He used to. I watched it. And so every time I play Mexican Train, I just have to laugh because I remember what things he used to do. But, with my son, I had less than 24 hours with him. And so that one I didn't have a lot of memories with. And I had to make them in that moment. And I think that's what my brain somehow went into focus mode of. I was lucky enough to get pictures. The hospital gave us a photographer. And so I was lucky enough to make that moment, that little amount of time, really matter. And I'm so grateful for it because coming back to what I started this with, that grief roller coaster was ugly the first year of it. I mean, I cannot describe that. I would have very few days that I could feel fine and normal and, in a sense, not feel things. There were days that was so ugly I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't control that pain and that suffering. And that's, again, I would try to tell myself that, that was his experience. I got to witness it. It wasn't mine, but that was a big fight for me. That was over a year for me just to get some kind of normalcy into my life. And I still get waves of grief, by the way. I still struggle to go to the store after Thanksgiving. I can't stand it when the Christmas music comes on. It's utterly triggering for me. And so, that's what's really, I share too with grief, is that you will get triggered a lot in society. It'll be, somebody will say something, it'll just remind you of that person. And your body feels that and knows that. And so those triggers aren't a bad thing, but they're also, again, their emotions trying to communicate with you, to feel what you're feeling and understand your emotions are going through. But I'm really grateful for my son, and people look at me crazy and they go, well, you lost a kid. How are you in this gratitude place? Like, this is just weird. And I say that, unless you've gone through something like that, you'll never fully understand it. And I've been in the lost community with parents that have lost children and lost multiples, by the way, and I don't even know how the heck they're still standing and doing what they do. And I've seen people create beautiful nonprofits. I've seen people donate to hospitals, volunteer time, create spaces for people that have gone through certain kinds of losses. And so I share this story not to say that it's a negative thing, because I don't think it is. I think there's a very beautiful thing that comes out of these losses. And one of my big purposes of my son that I told my wife after he passed, I said, I don't want him to be this thing that just happened in my life. I don't want it to be this experience that just happened. That will make me cry and upset and depressed. So I said, I became a coach because I said I can carry my son's legacy through helping other people through these losses, whether that's child loss, losing a grandfather, losing a grandmother, losing an uncle, losing a brother, losing a job, losing a house. There's loss in all of our lives. And so if I can help people through that process a little easier because of my experience, then his life wasn't for nothing. There was purpose behind it. There was meaning behind it. And there's nothing better than to give back and have gratitude in that moment for that life. And that's where I've been so blessed and fortunate, because I get to meet people like Gabby every day. I get to serve people every day. I hear stories of people's loss. I won't go into it because I've heard some pretty rough stuff lately. And I want to be kind to those people, by the way, but I'm grateful for them sharing their experiences. I'm grateful for them giving me an opportunity to help. And so loss doesn't have to be this negative, really heavy subject. It doesn't have to be. We're trained to it in society in that fashion, but it doesn't have to be. And that's where I think that we all have an ability to create. We all have an ability to give back, and we all have a valuable experience. And that's something I try to empower people to embrace and to give back in the world. You have a beautiful gift in the middle of this nasty thing. And so give that gift to the world. You'd be amazed what can come your way.
Absolutely. I think that's so incredible. And there's something that you started to share that this is going to kind of pull us on a little bit of a tangent, that I'm curious what kind of beliefs that you had around grief and loss, and kind of what that looked like before you actually experienced these two losses. Because I see the other side of it, of how to transform your experience into something that will support others. And what was it like before with your beliefs around grief and loss?
So my beliefs before that were just very, very emotional and unemotional. I've lost aunts and uncles in my family that I was never really close to. I saw them once or twice a year, or maybe once or twice every 2 years, 3 years. And I never had like enough of an emotional connection. That's not to say I didn't care. It was just, I'm sad you're gone, and I wish we'd spent more time together, but I didn't have like an emotional tie with it. When I lost my great grandma back in, I think, 8th grade, if I remember right, I don't remember much of that because I was such a little kid, but I do remember that, for a couple of weeks, I was off a lot. I couldn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand why it happened or how it happened. And my mom kind of trained me to just, be tough and push through it and just try to get over it, kind of thing. And so that was a lot of my belief when things happen, because we learn from our parents. what can I say about that? But as you get older, right, you discover who you are individually, and you start, I hope most people do this because I think it's healthy, but question your beliefs. Question, why do you, I don't like why questions. They tend to lead with blame, but I always say, what caused you to believe this? Or how was this belief created? I ask that very differently than why do you think something, because that leads to blaming yourself and blame to other people. So I always say, what led you down this road to believe this? Or how did this belief form in you? And then that way you can actually, without blame, look inwards and say, oh, so-and-so told me to think this way about grief. Someone told me this way to think about loss. Does it really make sense? Am I just taking on someone's belief, or is this my own belief I have? My own belief, honestly, is what I have today, minus the gratitude part, was how I used to feel back then. But I got told by my family that it's just a part of life. Got to get over it. Got to move on. Grandma's gone. And that's really hard, again, because you're suppressing your emotions. You're not listening to yourself. And that elicits a buildup of things, by the way, that can break out into your life and other negative aspects. So when my grandfather died, I didn't really get a chance really to talk to my grandmother or my mom about it because they just wouldn't want to do it. And my wife was there for me, thank God. She was a big proponent of, get this out, talk about this. Let's find a way to work through this. So my beliefs have changed quite a bit over my life, I'll say, around grief and loss. And I'm very grateful that I hired a coach back in 2018. I'm very grateful that I'm a personal development, personal growth junkie. That's what I like to call it. I've got more books than I can shake a fist at. But I talk to people all the time, and I can tell you that my clients in coaching are the greatest gifts. They're people that I don't see them as broken and they need help or they're lost or all those things that people associate with coaching. I see them as beautiful people that have experienced something different than me, and they have something to value just like I do about that experience. And so as much as I coach people and I help people, I also get help and learn from them. And so that's the real beauty of being able to question your beliefs, question your convictions. Maybe that belief isn't serving you anymore. Maybe you've held on to that for 20 years. I talked to a gal that lost her friend in a car crash. A drunk driver hit the car, killed her best friend. And she said, I never really cried for many years because I just got told, you cry a lot. You cry too much. Why do you always do this? And she never gave herself permission to do it. And it took her friend getting killed in a drunk driving accident to cry and allow herself to feel. And that's sad that it took that. But I also at the same time applaud her for taking that moment, taking that opportunity. And she now celebrates her friend. Just like I said, I celebrate my son through coaching. I celebrate my grandfather in sailing. She's doing that same exact thing with her friend. So she travels, she runs marathons, she's got her own coaching practice. She wants to help people with grief just like I do. So I share that story to say that when you question your beliefs, it doesn't mean you're a weak person. It doesn't mean you're dumb. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means that you're a strong enough person to say, maybe if I change my belief system a little bit, it'll align more with me and I'll actually understand who I am and how I feel. And that's really stepping into your personal power, as I like to say.
Don't go anywhere just yet. We will be back with this conversation in just a moment. Thank you so much for spending your time with me here on the Nexus of Narratives. As you may know by now, it goes a long way to support the podcast by listening, following, rating, and reviewing. So if you have enjoyed the content, please take a moment to support extending the reach of this important work. While the public episodes of the Nexus of Narratives focus on the stories of our guests, how belief systems have been formed, and how to build connection, we keep the conversation going on Patreon. We've built a phenomenal community of peer connectors on Patreon who are looking to build a more compassionate world together. While I could be continuing the conversation with the guest or digesting fantastic themes with my dear friend Rowan, there is a lot of great bonus content on Patreon, including additional benefits for different tiers. Search Nexus of Narratives on Patreon or click the link in the show notes to join this exclusive community. I look forward to connecting with you there. For more information on the Nexus of Narratives, ways to listen, opportunities to connect with me or share a story of your own, go to nexusofnarratives.org. I personally monitor that inbox, so it is a quick and simple way to connect directly with me. Whether you're a new listener or have been around for a while, I'm deeply grateful for your time and commitment to this work. Without keeping you any longer, let's get back to the story. Absolutely. Yeah. And what came up for me as you were sharing that is, I keep on saying it, but someday my husband and I will record a few episodes of some of the different experiences that we've had and some of the challenges that we've had through our relationship. And it wasn't until more recently that some of the most painful moments that we experienced in our relationship, due to us not effectively working on our own emotions and our own selves and overcoming our own challenges, that then the way that we interacted with each other was not healthy. And we had just like this huge blow up in our relationship. And so someday I'll have episodes of us talking about that. But it wasn't until recently that I was able to actually look at those experiences with gratitude, which is something that I never thought I could look at some of the most painful moments of my life with gratitude. And I realized, had this horrible thing in our relationship not happened, I wouldn't have gotten into personal development and success myself, now working for that same personal growth company. And this podcast wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have had made the connections and the growth for myself to really step into my power and my own growth to become a person that right now I'm only getting started in what's possible for me. And I am more empowered than I ever thought I would be. And I don't know that I would have gone down that path had that horrible thing not happened. So then to finally experience gratitude for that pain was one of the coolest, most emotional cries I think I've ever had. It was awesome to feel that. And so that's something that I hope others can experience too, to be like, man, that was extremely painful. But now that I'm at this version of myself, I can see how that was a gift, how that happened for me, not to me, that I'm not a victim to what happened, but this was a part of me becoming this awesome version of me.
Well, can I ask you a question since you brought that up? Because I've been looking, I love to ask anybody I talk to this question. That moment of acceptance, that moment of just, I face this. And when you feel that moment of acceptance, do you feel like a release within you? Like there's like tension inside you that just goes, like, what was your experience with that when you came to acceptance?
I feel like, so I have a handful of moments where I feel like I went through that acceptance of different heavy moments in my life. And I'd say it almost feels like dropping like 50 pounds of tension off the chest. That there's almost this, like for anyone who's watching video, where I'm like, I'm someone who loves control. And so I'm like, ugh. And then to accept, I'm like, oh, relax. Relief.
Love that.
Oh, okay. Almost like for me, when I'm at the chiropractor and he gets like a really good pop of release, and I'm just like, oh, thank you. Maybe like that. But it feels like an actual weight has been lifted off. And it doesn't mean that there aren't still moments where I will feel grief or pain for that. It doesn't mean that it's all gone because I've experienced acceptance or I've experienced forgiveness. It doesn't mean that it's gone. It doesn't mean that some kind of tension or weight might not still come back. But that moment where I'm like, whoa, this all wouldn't have happened. And I actually finally feel gratitude. There is almost this experience of like a wave of relief and release that goes over my body.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because that's what I wanted. I want people to learn that when you get to that place of acceptance, that's what it feels like. It's not all up here and you just say, oh, okay, it's fine. Like I'm good. That doesn't work that way. It's very much like you said it. It's like, this is like, oh, thank the Lord. Like I felt that same thing when I was building a box for my son's ashes. I was a woodworker, shortly after he passed, like a month after. And I had been trying my best to stay in this positive gratitude place, and I didn't know how damaging that was actually building in me. Anyway, the wood wasn't cooperating. Long story short, I threw it on the floor because I was really upset thinking about him. And I went to step on it and smashed my foot. And long story short, I had to crawl up my stairs in my house on my hands and knees, so I couldn't walk. And went to the doctor the next day. I got it all figured out. But what happened, like you just described, about 45 minutes after that happened, after I was done crying, I was in a lot of pain. I cried like a crazy person for half an hour. What I found out in that moment, though, is that my anger I had in that moment with that wood, it wasn't even about the anger. That was the funny part. It was that I love my kid that much. It was just straight love, but I didn't give it space prior to that to come out because I was not sure how to release it. And so that moment of crushing my heel was that release. And all of a sudden, the emotional floodgate opened up, and I cried, and I didn't get angry after that. What did come out is I'm really upset he's not here. I'm really upset this happened. I don't understand why it happened. I don't know why this has to be like this. Um, all this stuff started dumping out of me. Like, why did I have to lose my job 3 months before losing my kid? Why is my kid gone? Why is my life going down this path? Like, I had all this release come out, and it never came out very angry with, cussing or screaming. It came out very much in question and emotional base. And that's where I learned that my acceptance that day came through. Just like you said, that for me, my release came out a little different, but um, that was the day I really made acceptance. And I said, I don't like this. I don't have to like it, but I accept it. And I'm never going to fully understand why or how or what. But I've got to find purpose from here. And that started my path to finding purpose. But I share that to just say, like, kind of like you said, you let that release come and just, it like just flows out of you. And then you're actually clear headed enough at that point to process your feelings, process your emotions, listen to those things. I've always shared in coaching that emotions are messages. And so I always laugh when I brought up, and I'm sure you've heard this, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this podcast have heard this. People in our life have always said, control your emotions. That's another phrase I don't really care for. And the reason I say it is that that's in here. We can't hold it. We can't, like, this isn't emotion. This is just air that I'm holding. I can't hold that emotion. And so I always say, instead of controlling your emotions, which you can't, by the way, consider them messages. Consider them something trying to talk to you. It's trying to tell you something. My anger when I lost my kid was, hey, you love your son a lot. You never thought you'd see yourself in the light of being a parent. You love your kid this much. This is why you're angry. It's not because you're angry because you want to be mad. It's this. And once you listen to that, by the way, your physiology in your body, you'll feel tension drop, your shoulders drop, you'll feel your head get light and clear. When you listen to those emotions as messages, every tension in your body starts going away because you're listening. Even if you have anxiety, by the way, I've talked to people that I myself am one of them, by the way, that got anxiety going through those losses. And same thing with anxiety. People say, oh, it's a scary thing. Oh, it's this bad thing. Oh, I don't like this. It's uncomfortable. Your body's trying to communicate with you, and you got to listen to it. If you have anxiety, I'll share, if you actually just sit there and don't distract yourself with a lot of things, but just sit and quietly and constantly ask your mind, what are you trying to tell me right now? What am I trying to be told to feel? What's this emotion trying to communicate with me? You'll be shocked when you hear the answer of your body tell you that the anxiety goes away. It completely melts. And it tells you, hey, I'm not feeling heard today. I'm not feeling seen. I feel misunderstood. I don't fully understand this thing going on. And once you hear that, again, it's that release. It's just that, okay, I got this. Now I understand this. So it
absolutely
puts you in a good place.
Yeah, it's, I think before I really started working through what were those signs of my different emotions, whether around any kind of grief that I was experiencing that had translated into anxiety that I had attempted to control among all of the other things that I attempted to control, because those of us like me, I would try to control because I felt out of control. And what actually happened to my body as I was working to suppress all of those things was I developed an autoimmune disorder. My thyroid stopped functioning properly. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't balance my own emotions. So I was on mood stabilizers and I had panic attacks regularly. And I couldn't actually like digest food properly. Like my gut was an absolute disaster. And so my body was completely just out of whack because I was just working to suppress so much that all of the signposts of my emotions, I wasn't listening to those. And my body was like, hey, are you going to listen to this? And I was like, no, I won't listen to any of it. And it wasn't until I started to do a lot of that work to heal and to release that things started getting back on track with my body, and to the point where I'm no longer on mood stabilizers. I am not having issues with my thyroid. My blood work is great and I am healthy where I was not before in so many ways. And I can't remember the last time I had a panic attack. It's been at least 2 years. So there are different signs. There's so many signs that I didn't listen to that you reminded me of as you were sharing.
I appreciate you sharing that because that's what happens during grief. I watched a show on TLC called 600 Pound Life. It's people that are dealing with extreme morbid obesity. And shockingly funny story. Like most people that watch that, I thought that was like overeating problems. You would be amazed if you actually pay attention to that show without judgment of any kind. You will notice that 99% of the problems those people face are emotional problems. They're not related to food. They're not related to bad habits. They're not related to those things. It's very emotional bound. And so when you watch people, I'm glad you brought your story to light. I appreciate your vulnerability to share that. But when you said that I wasn't listening to my emotions, and all of a sudden I have autoimmune disorders, my gut's out of whack, I have to be on mood stabilizers, I got this problem going on. Our bodies really are smart, and this thing up here is smarter than you give it credit for. And don't let anybody ever tell you how to think, feel, believe, any of that. Don't let anybody do that, because this thing is a lot smarter than you even know. And it will, if things are off, it will start doing things like that. It'll ruin your gut. It'll give you anxiety problems. It's panic attacks too are the body's sign of there's a big need not being met. There's a big emotion not being heard. That's what's really going on. People think that it's panic and fear and all these like things that you hear. No, man, your body's trying to communicate with you. Your body's trying to talk to you and say, I've got something that needs to be let out. I've got something that needs to be heard. I struggled with it a lot. My whole life, I was very misunderstood as a person, very misunderstood. It made me really angry. I can tell you 6, 7 years ago, I was 250 pounds, eating fast food constantly, never worked out. I couldn't run or walk or whatever. I was just, I'm not trying to be crude here, but I was fat. I was out of shape. And my body literally just went to a place of dark depression. And at a certain point, I came across a guy named David Goggins, and, I'll keep it PC because he likes to swear a lot, but he had the same thing happen. He got to be 300 pounds, and he said in one of his podcasts, and this is when I turned my life around, by the way, when I heard this, he said, that 300-pound fat guy that likes milkshakes and sprays cockroaches for Ecolab, he's still there. He still lives up here. But I have to be stronger than him every day. I have to get up every day and know I'm stronger than that. I'm better than that. I can change my life around. I have power. And I got into working out a lot because of him. And there was a time I did 10 push-ups for the first time in many years, and I fell on the floor, hard breathing. Just I was that out of shape. And so when you go through grief and loss and trauma, it's not uncommon for people to gain weight. It's not uncommon for people to have experiences like you had, by the way, with health issues. It's not uncommon. But I say all what I just did, by the way, for the last 2 minutes to say the following. Don't let people define those symptoms as something medical a lot of the time, because there's emotional things going on underneath that, just like the 600-pound life people. There's emotion going on there. I watched that show, I don't know how many times, and they lost a family member through death in a very tragic way. They had a parent that was a very narcissistic, abusive person that not only verbally and emotionally abused them, physically abused them. They didn't get overweight because they just wanted to eat food constantly. That's not even what happened. they had a lot of emotional pain and a lot of emotional turbulence hit them. And so that overeating thing, or that, lashing out whatever way, that's really a sign and a cry for help is what I like to call it. I don't see that as a problem. I see it as a cry for help. And so, I'll share to anybody going through grief and loss, look for those signs with yourself. If you start experiencing those symptoms, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with your body. There's an emotional base underneath there that's not being let out. And so it's trying to present itself in these other areas. And so, I've said it a lot today, but just give yourself permission to feel. It's okay to not be okay. Just please listen to that. It's okay not to be okay. I've been there so many times.
Yes.
Feel your emotions. Feel them. You'll be shocked at the difference your body feels.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah. And I want to segue us to the questions that I ask everyone, which I believe you already answered, but just to have them clear and succinct for the sake of keeping the same container for everybody, is how can your stories create connection for people who can relate to anything that you said or have similar beliefs?
That is a good question. If I could say one thing, I share my story not to bring out the negatives and things, but I share it as a transformational journey and something that I feel we all have. Whoever's listening to this today, I'm sure you've gone through loss. I'm sure you have. I would encourage, don't compare a loss to a loss, because our journeys are individual and they're very personal to us. But just know that your story and your experience you've gone through can and will help other people. So don't be shy about holding that back. Take your time to grieve and heal, in your format, by the way, whether that's a year or 2 or 3, however long it takes you. But just know that you have a gift there to give back to other people.
That's incredible. I love that. And what did or do you need to feel most connected to the people around you?
For me, I will say my big thing is just being seen and heard and understood. That's for me. I'm very focused right now on building a community of people, and I've been very blessed to meet people like you, on my podcast journey and in my Facebook groups. I went through my whole life, by the way, being very misunderstood. I've gone through narcissistic abuse. I've been dealt with abusive environments at work. I've dealt with family members that treat me very poorly and always walk around and say there's something wrong with me. That's been the story of my life, and I don't share a lot of that just because I'm still working through that myself. Some transparency, but I like to feel a genuine connection with people. That's my thing. You don't have to be fake or put on a facade around me or pretend you're fully healed. You don't have to be that person around me. I really love the transparency and the honesty with people. And that's why today, Gabby, I appreciate you being vulnerable enough to share your story about panic attacks and having gut issues and autoimmune disorders, sharing that story. That's real. That's being real with ourselves. I think we live in a society where people look at Instagram all the time or look at Facebook and say, oh, this person's got it all figured out. Oh, they got this nice, rich lifestyle. And that is a very small portion of people, my friends. I'm trying to paraphrase what David Goggins says, and I'm going to say it a lot nicer just because we need to be PC here, but we're all messed up. All of us are. Some people do a better job of hiding it than others, but the people that are not scared to say, I'm messed up, and raise a hand and say, this is my story. This is what I've gone through. This is what I've experienced. I love people like that. I love you to death, because you are not only being true to yourself and real to yourself, but you're sharing that gift with the world. And you have no idea how many people you're helping by sharing that. So that's what I want.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And thank you for that. I do feel the greatest gift that we can offer to people is our authenticity in a world that feels so fake at times. And it's funny because the strongest mask that I wear is the mask of perfectionism. And it's one that I'm still learning exactly how deep it runs in me. And even when I am doing what I think is all that I can to be open and vulnerable and authentic, I have a mentor who's like, Gabby, can you just please take off the mask? It's still too perfect. And I'm like, what the? Like, what are you talking about? And so I think I'm still discovering just how pervasive that is for me. And so as I continue to invite people to be vulnerable, I do truly believe that it only makes sense that I also share tender parts of myself when I'm inviting other people to share tender parts of themselves, because it's not a one-way street. That's not how we create these connections. That's not how we create acceptance with one another. I think it takes both people.
Yeah.
So thank you for saying that. My third question, I went a little bit out of order, I realized, is for anyone who can relate to where you were at any point of your grief journey, what might you say to a past version of yourself?
The past version of myself, I got asked that last week, and that was the first time I heard that question. So I'm glad I got a second chance today. What I would share with my past self is that, I'm glad you brought up perfectionism too, because I struggle with that a lot. My past self, I would tell myself, stop listening to other people tell you what to do, how to think, how to feel, how to believe. Let's just stop listening to that. You are your own unique person. You have your own unique journey. It will never be the same journey any other person walking this planet will ever have. There's times you will be tested. There's times that life will be so unbearably painful that you will wonder what your purpose is and why you're here and why this happened to you. And I will share that even those darkest moments of things, when life gets insanely hard, you still have the strength to pull through it. And that moment, by the way, and you won't see it in that moment, but see it in the one after, everything that's happening that you see to you in this moment is happening for you. And you will come out the other side a much better person, but a person that knows themselves better than other people know you. And you will have one of the biggest gifts and one of the biggest opportunities to give back in this world and make it a better place.
That's amazing. That was really beautiful. Thank you. And last but not least, where I like to get a little cheeky, is if anyone's listening and they're like, my goodness, these two people, they don't get it. They're way off their rockers, whatever. I don't agree with a single thing that they said. They've absolutely lost their minds. How can your story create connection for people who have different experiences and different beliefs?
What I want to share about that, because I struggled with that in my older version of myself, ask yourself, when you do get challenged with the belief system, by the way, know that you don't have to take it on. You don't have to. That's my other phrase I use in coaching. You don't have to feel these ways. You don't have to think this way. Don't look at it from a sign of being forced to conform, but just see it as an opinion. And if you, for example, if you did listen to Gabby and me today and you're just like, you guys are crazy. What are you talking about with this like gift of death and loss? And like, what are you even thinking about? Like, you're crazy, straight up crazy. I want to commend you for thinking that way. I first off want to say that I commend you for that, because that action by itself, by the way, means that you're willing to question your belief systems. You just don't know it yet. And what I do want to say, by the way, take time to process that feeling you have. And my other part of that too, I read a book by James Clear many years ago called Atomic Habits. And I found this, I'm taking this principle and I'm applying it to grief, because man, you can't get over this stuff. You just can't. Take his 1% rule, just 1%. 1% a day. Think about that belief system you have. Think about what you heard on this podcast. If there were things that you disagreed with, write those things down. I mean it. Write them down and write down why you think they're crazy. I'm honest. Write it down. I say this is crazy because of this. And the reason I want you to do this, by the way, is that exercise of writing down why you think Gabby and I might be crazy. You're actually opening the door in your mind, by the way, to get all your thoughts and feelings and emotions out. And by the way, this is not the Chris and Gabby show. This is the you show. This is getting inside your head, getting all those things down. This is going to allow you to grow. It's going to allow you to process those thoughts. And it's going to put you in that place to say, you know what? Now that I actually gave myself permission to write down my feelings and emotions about this, yeah, we got like a little bit in common. I don't necessarily agree with this thing over here, but I can kind of see this over here. And what you're going to do is end up creating your own belief system, by the way. It's not the Chris show because Chris told you to. You're going to create your own belief system. And maybe that shifts a little bit. Maybe it's a 2 millimeter shift to the left, just a tiny little shift. But the point is that you created it. So that's what I want to share. If you think we're crazy today, do this exercise of writing down why you think we're crazy, because you're going to allow yourself to get in your own mind and your own emotions and your own space and really start giving yourself permission to figure out your belief system. And that's the biggest gift, by the way, that we didn't give it to you. You gave it to yourself. And that's a beautiful thing. So I want to commend anybody who's thinking we're crazy, or I commend you.
That was incredible. Thank you. Yes. And so as we start to wrap up, can you share with anyone who's interested in getting in touch with you? How can they find you? We'll also have your information in the show notes, but just if anyone wants to get in touch that's listening.
If you guys want to get in touch with me, I'm very, very active on Facebook right now. My profile is on public, so you guys can like me, friend request me. I encourage comments in the questions, by the way, on my posts. By the way, I'm just going to put this out there since we were talking about people that might think I'm crazy, and will say I'm pretty much crazy. I've gone through a lot of stuff. Please write questions to me. I love questions. Even if you disagree with me, by the way, I love questions, because you guys that do disagree with me, by the way, and this is one of my things I've learned on my past journey, you guys have been the ones that have actually helped me become the person I am today. So without you, I couldn't be where I am. And so follow me on Facebook. I'm working on building Instagram and TikTok right now, so I've got a few followers going on that side as well. I do have a website I'm in progress changing, because I've really found some new aspects of my own healing journey that I have to learn to share and be open with people. So I'd love to have you guys follow me on social media. It's a fun place to be, and I've just met some really great people, and maybe you happen to be one of them I haven't met yet. So let's connect.
I love that. Incredible. Incredible. Maybe you're one of those people that I haven't met yet. Same goes for me. Have people reach out too. I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful, and a conversation that I didn't initially anticipate, but it kind of seems obvious on the back end of it that there was a lot of alignment to where we both had the opportunity to share stories and get vulnerable and share some experiences. So thank you for pseudo co-facilitating with me. That was a really lovely experience for me. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Gabby. I'm really glad we got to both share our stories and both, talk about topics that align on our healing journeys. It's been very, very informative for me. I've learned some new things today.
Awesome. Yeah, me as well. So many insights as always. All right. And until next time. Wow, what a tremendous conversation that was. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope you were able to find just as many nuggets of wisdom as well as actionable steps to create connection in the spaces all around you. This is an extremely grassroots production, so thank you to my dear friend Rowan for their commitment to this work in supporting leading fantastic conversations on Patreon and so much more. So be sure to join that Patreon community to enjoy the additional content. And thank you so much to my sweet and talented husband, DJ, for editing the audio and creating the music that is used in this podcast. And of course, it almost feels like it goes without saying, thank you to every single listener. Thank you to every single guest who has committed their time and energy to support what I feel is such important work in bringing people together and creating connection.
Let's slay it. Okay.
Right. You did say you were going to match my energy for this.
Somewhere between.
That's where we are today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,